Hello everybody and welcome back to Kilohearts. My name is George, this is Per and this is Anders and we're here to talk feature requests today. Hello, welcome folks, how are you doing?
All good?
Yeah, really nice and hot and humid here in Sweden.
Yeah.
It's nice to welcome you when we've been sitting together in the office all day, but welcome to you and welcome to the folks at home. They're the real ones we're welcoming in to our space here. This new, slightly more America's friendly time. We thought we'd stick around after work and save some fun chat for you. So get busy in the comments. Tell us all about what you want to tell us, feature requests. That's part of today, is to just hear some of your feature requests, but also to discuss the topic in general, how we get feature requests, what use they are to us, whether we like them or not, whether we wish everyone would go away, and so on. And we'll get to the bottom of it. We're going to really solve some problems today, I expect. I see that Per's brought a few visual aids with him, so maybe we'll get to those in a second.
Oh yeah, sure.
But for now, perhaps we'll just check the chat and make sure that everything's running smoothly. We've got Jason Gilman. How do you do, fellow students, in the comments? That's nice of you, Jason. We do well, don't we?
Yep.
Fellow children, or whatever it is. Connor's in the chat, Musa, Pierre, Nasco, Sanjo, hello everybody, Daniel Staff, evening gentlemen. We are pretty gentlemen, yeah.
We actually mentioned earlier, I saw one comment there that we should switch my name to Per Anders because there's two pairs. And we mentioned before the stream here that Per's name is actually Per Anders.
Yeah, my middle name is Anders.
So for maximum confusion here.
Stupid. And also, my name is Per Salbark and the other Per is Per Larsson. But I was actually born Per Larsson, and then like for 2 weeks until my parents got married and changed my name.
Why are there only 7 names in Sweden?
Yeah, we make do.
All the women are called Anna Andersson, and all the men are called Anders Persson.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great fun. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a few more people in the chat than we've had before, so obviously feature requests is a hot topic.
Sure.
I'm going to try and read some of them out, but before we do, let's just start by asking the owners of Kilohearts here what they think of feature requests. What are your sort of opening remarks on the topic? Let's start with Anders.
Yeah, well, it's always great to get feature requests because it means that people have like used the stuff and thought, oh, this is great, but I would also want this thing. So I think it's a positive thing to have ideas on how to improve it because that means you kind of care about it. So that's really nice. Then, of course, a lot of the feature requests we get are things we have already thought about ourselves because we obviously think about what we want to do to it and with it. It might feel a bit like the response is often like, yeah, cool idea, we have already thought about that. But that doesn't mean we don't care about it. It's great to.
And I understand we'll probably get into this a bit, but there's a bunch of different categories of reasons why something might not yet have happened.
Yes.
Quite rarely it's because we haven't thought of it or it hasn't come up before, but that does happen occasionally.
Yeah.
Someone will just suggest something that's never happened or we've never thought of, and that's great. But there's lots of other reasons. There's time restraints, realities of developing software that works and things that work together well, because you can sometimes develop one thing that breaks another thing or makes another thing weird, or so there's lots of
and there's
reasons
also
we'll get into, right?
And another very big reason is even though an idea might sound like very easily understandable as a concept, I don't know, say vocoding sounds like a super simple concept that many other plugin companies do. When you start to implement it or design it, you immediately run into a bunch of problems that you didn't really think about. Like vocoding is mostly interesting if you have two sources of sound, but we make an instrument and your DAW will sort of think of that as the thing creating the sound, and it's not easy to get another track routed into there and design things that come up and make stuff difficult that you might not think of right off the bat. So that's another big reason why things don't immediately get done all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also very often there are like interactions with other features that might not be totally obvious. Like if we add this button that does this, then that means that this other feature needs to do the same thing or work in a different way or whatever. So yeah, there's usually a lot of things to, not necessarily problems, but it takes time to just sit down and decide on how to do it.
Right.
You have to like make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, as developers, you have lots of what you would call reasons. I would call them excuses, and I'm sure so would all the folks at home. And maybe we can go through and make some excuses about some of their suggestions here, because there are so many good ones. Gade System says, Wave Shaper, please, please, please. And someone else has said something, on my knees begging loudly, Wave Shaper, please. So, Wave Shaper, what is that and why don't we have one?
I think what people mean when they say wave shaper is usually like a custom wave shaper because to some extent our distortion is a wave shaper, but I think what most people mean is a wave shaper with a customizable curve. And I dare to say that we'll do that in some shape or form, but maybe I won't say right now exactly how or what, but maybe we've already said it before, I don't know, but yeah, we're working on something.
Yeah, and it's very high on the list also of stuff that will be, out. So, as usual, we never give any dates or any promises, but it's very, very high on the list of things we're working on, yeah.
I want a date.
Yeah.
I want one.
Well, that's very nice of you, but I
I'm married, but
actually, I've just found out Connor also asking about Wave Shaper, so that's cool. Premium Shaper Table, ? He says. So lots of ideas and suggestions. Faceplant Sequencer and Multi-Samples, asks Pierre.
Yeah. Well, this is maybe a time to get into my little visual aid that I had.
Oh, sure.
Because like a couple of months back, we were talking about our most wanted features for ourselves, and I just made a little list of like these little paper snippets here where I had this thing is one of them. MIDI processing lane, it says.
I don't know if it's readable. Or
maybe not.
And these are kind of popular requests, or
these are not necessarily popular. These are like my top 8 dream features that I would love to see in one shape or another. To set everyone's expectations, I call them once a year kind of features. So they're sort of big projects, all of them. But when it comes to sequencers and arpeggiators, our current modulation system doesn't really allow for it in a good way, because our current modulation system deals with one continuous value that changes over time, and a sequencer would typically have at least 2, like normally your pitch, and then also an amplitude or like silence or something, and that doesn't go very well together with what we have right now. So the idea in my mind, at least, is to make a separate add-on lane of effects on the very left of your hosts, like Faceplant and Multipass, where you could add modules from a new set of modules that would be dealing with incoming MIDI. So it would pre-process your MIDI. So if a sequencer would go great in there, it could take either it could just take a note on and then trigger a little sequence of notes that you program into it, or it could be pitch dependent on the note you play, more of an arpeggiator in that case, or you could do other cool MIDI stuff like microtonal tuning and other cool MIDI effects that go as the very first step of your patch.
Yeah. I've noticed we've got a lot of comments coming in, so excuse us if we don't get to everyone's feature requests today, but join the Discord. We have a whole channel about feature requests, so that's another thing relevant to the topic, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, maybe we should talk about that for a second as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So we have the Kilohearts has been around for a while, and we've been getting feature requests all throughout. And speaking about microtonality, I think that was maybe one of the very first feature requests I ever got for KHS1. But we have dealt with feature requests in various ways, and since a couple of years we've landed in something that sort of works well for us, which is our Discord chat, where we have a channel specifically for feature requests, and we don't respond to all of them. There are just way too many, but it's a great way for us to like gauge or see the interest in a particular feature, because if it's something is wanted by many people, it will come up again and again and again and remind us, and we feel like this works a lot better than stuff we've tried before, like public lists with like votes or stuff like that. That is very for one, it's always an overwhelming amount of stuff, and then it also stuff like that would inevitably make us look pretty bad when there's a bad bug or a very popular feature that just doesn't get implemented, and that causes a lot of bad will. And we think that this sort of system we have right now, with the more like transient chat form that scrolls away, works much better for us, at least. And we hope that people can somewhat understand our reasoning behind that.
Yeah, it's a really tough thing to, and I say this for you as if I know, but it's not tough for me because I don't implement any of this stuff, but it's a really tough thing to have such a lot of you having so many good ideas, because we are only a small team and we have a very specific view of what product we want to make, I think, and that's a carefully curated view over time. And so even though there's 1,000 good ideas, we might only get around to making one of them real per year, because we don't want to just throw everything together in a slapdash way to try and please everyone. We want to do the best job possible, and I hope that the fact that you're all here is testament to the fact that a good job is being done overall over the 10 years or more that Kilohearts has been at it. But it probably is pretty disappointing to have a pet feature that you just really want to see and it never quite gets there, and that's a shame that we're aware of, and we wish we could make it exactly as you all want individually.
Right, yeah.
Of course, that would be cool. That's my feature request. Personalized plugins for everybody.
Yeah, but I think that's a big thing, that kind of implementing one thing can both mean that you're not implementing another thing because you didn't have the time, or that you add something to the system that adds complexity for all users and for maintenance and everything. So sometimes you kind of have to weigh, okay, this feature is really important for this person, but unfortunately it makes it more complex for everyone else who aren't using that thing. So you kind of have to balance that, like, okay, how useful is it for everyone? How useful is it for this case? Can you do it another way? And so on. And then that's also leading into another thing, that since we have this modular system and all the kind of emergence, there's a lot of things that you can do, but it might be a bit like messy. You have to connect things in weird ways, and then you have to kind of choose, okay, should we make this thing more simple to do? We like add a shortcut for it, or a specialized feature for that thing, because enough people want to do that specific thing when it's actually possible to do it, but you have to click like 200 times. And so that's also a kind of balance with...
Yeah, the warp modes being the prime example.
Yep.
People would love to have some kind of shortcut to the warp modes. It's just that the common warp modes that people know and love, they share some similarities technically, but you know, some of them are very weird. So when you like understand how to set them up in Faceplant, you realize that they're just a hodgepodge. Like,
well, you can do them and 1,000 other things.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
And it's very, some of them share very little like in how
Yep.
they're technically set up.
Yep.
We could maybe do some kind of, shortcuts to using them, and we tried to design that, but we always ended up in with the idea that, well, it's stupid to make this very short list of 5 things that you could do in the grand scheme of a gazillion things that would be as interesting. So yeah, that's
Tough to find the balance. It's something for everyone, or all things to one person, or some balance in between. It's great to see so many folks watching and all these comments coming in. I'd say there's 58 watching right now, only 18 likes. So do click like on the video. It will make YouTube happy with us and bring thousands of other viewers to give us even more feature requests. Let's just take a little look at another one from the chat here. Color-based Doggo says, good name, an additive generator maybe.
Yeah. Let me pick up my thing again. Generator, additive.
Excellent.
This one, out of all the things on my dream list down here, I would say that this one is probably the farthest in the future. I'm sad to say. It would be extremely cool, but I also think it's a very big undertaking. And
a little bit depending on what you mean with additive. I mean, you could do simpler things,
right?
You could do more complex things. There's,
absolutely. So there's okay. Let me explain. The thing I'm thinking of is very sort of creative. It would be an additive generator, unlike any that I've seen before. But there would be there's a possibility of doing much simpler additive generators, like something based off an image like Harmor, or a generator that is easier to control in a more classic additive way, if you will. That might happen sooner. We'll see.
I'm just going to go back a little bit here. I see a couple say, Mozart was saying that MIDI processing host would be better than a lane, and someone else, Amado, says the sequencer can be like Multipass or Snap Heap, where it's a separate system, and that's also something that we've considering as an alternative to the MIDI processing lane, that you could also have basically a MIDI processing host which you put faceplant into, for example, or something like that. So I just want to mention that it's also one of the things we've been thinking about.
Right.
But
and I think if we ever do the extra pre-processing MIDI lane, I would guess that we would also make it as a free standing host, so you could choose whatever you want to do. At least in my mind, that's sort of like Snap Heap became its own host after we started using Multipass for a while. We said, maybe I just want one lane on its own.
Matthias says, my middle name is also Anders.
Yeah.
Great name.
Hello from Prague. Good evening from Prague, says Blue4. Let me just try and whip through a few of these. Vocoder when, says Graham. Additive spectral generator module, says YouTube. I'm not sure that's the real YouTube
official
HQ
YouTube.
Official. If it is, that's cool. Wave Shape says 5 steps. Additive generator. Hey, it's the sound design snacks voice, says Slow Freak. Thank you. Additive partial automation. So more additive stuff. Additive comes up a lot, right?
Yeah, there's like we mentioned before, there's a lot of people say additive, and I think many have very different ideas on what that means, because there's at least there's a few big different paths you can go down doing additive in various ways. So
some are easier, some are very hard.
Like Harmor and Razor, for example, are 2 additive synths, I think. I hope I'm not lying now. And they're fairly different in their ideas on what additive is, where one is more spectral focused, Harmor, I think, and Razor is more partial focus on doing weird partial transformations. If I'm totally wrong, please say so in the chat, because I haven't really used either. I've just briefly looked at the surface of them. So.
But point being, there's 1,000 ways to do any good idea, and one of the things that holds it up is finding the time to think through how we would like
Yep.
to do a thing and make it the best we can
Yeah.
seems to be a problem.
Yeah, and you mentioned vocoder again, and I also spoke about it a little bit in the intro, but we are also working on a vocoder. But again, one of the main difficulties with that is like fighting with the DAWs.
Yeah, it requires a bit of extra routing to route separate audio into instruments, which some DAWs can do, some DAWs don't.
Yeah.
DAWs and
So
don't.
we're also applying some political pressure on the DAW makers.
Yeah, we're doing feature requests.
Yeah, we're
to
doing
them,
feature requests ourselves. Yeah. Because if we have a vocoder, we feel like we have to have like audio input in a good way into FacePlant, so you can do, that cool vocoder effect that you want to do. You want to play your synth and apply it to your song, and that's difficult in some DAWs right now. So.
And if we can figure that out, then I can have my dream feature request, which we were talking about this morning, the modal synthesis thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And all the resonance stuff, and do that crazy
Yeah.
live imaginary
Beatbox.
Yeah, that would be
beatbox
fun.
into something that makes you sound like a church bell.
And from then on, all videos from Kilohearts will be me doing that.
Yeah.
And it'll just be
Right.
fun.
Bell boxing.
Yeah. Just want to zoom in on samples, says Tofu TV.
Oh.
Is that something in the sample editor that is somewhat
I
possible
think,
now?
in the sampler generator, you have a view of the sample, and that's
Yeah.
just a fixed view of the full sample, and it can be a little bit tedious to set like the start and loop points and
Gotcha.
everything in that view. I think it could be alleviated by adding like loop point edits into the wave editor, so because you can zoom and pan and everything around there. So that would be like one way to go, that if you want more detail than you can get from the generator view, you open the wave editor instead. I don't know, one more thing we need to like design, but yes, it's totally something we're aware of.
Excellent. I just wanted to point out that good job, everyone. My behavior request has worked, and there's now 55 likes on the video, which is wonderful. It's nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Michael Alexson says, more macros knobs, please. 8 isn't enough.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah.
This is something that we haven't thought about in a while, but this was a more common feature request earlier on, I feel.
Yeah, I think both more macros and like more options for the macros, like snapping and having like buttons instead of knobs and things like that are. I think Nasco is probably in the chat here somewhere, and I know he would really like more macro controls because it does pretty cool snappy presets with a lot of macro bindings, and they would absolutely behave better if you had, like, for example, stepped knobs for step things and so on. But also adding more macros, like, is something that we've talked a little bit about, like adding another row of macros and stuff like that. But
out of all of the modular like lists of modules that go into our plugins, I was always the proponent for making, for going from a fixed architecture to an unlimited amount of modules. So I always try to think that way about designing stuff. Why do we like, if there's one thing of a certain thing, then that's usually fine. If there's two, I always want two of like an identical thing. I always wonder why is it two? Why is it not as many as you need? And this goes for macros as well. And I really appreciate the point of having many of them. One of the reasons that they are 8, and I'm not saying it's a good reason, but one of the reasons is that a lot of physical controllers will have 8 macro knobs on them. But there are exceptions to that as well. So
it has been slightly the requirement for it is slightly less now that we have the automation slots, because usually the request for more macros is to be able to automate more stuff. and you can kind of do that now with
Yeah.
automation slots. But there still are a lot of reasons for why you would want more macros anyway. So
A flexible number.
yeah, so one perhaps slightly silly way would be to have like the possibility to add a macro to the modulation lane. So you could have like a macro modulator, which is
Yeah.
just a knob.
This is
Could-
something
but-
that happens in other similar systems, I know.
Yeah, but it's not fantastic, but it's good in some ways and a little bit silly in some ways.
I have mock-ups of the actual macro row being modular as everything
Yep.
else. So you add a macro when you need it, and you add a toggle, or you add a
Yeah.
knob, or you add a slider, or whatever you need. We'll
The
see.
macros are a little bit special since they're exposed to the DAW as an automatable parameter, so
You can't go infinite.
or at least the automatable number would be finite.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just not trying hard enough, guys.
Yeah. Could be.
A similar request in terms of more of something, more generators in faceplant, says Heavy DMB, higher generator limit.
Yeah.
Yeah, both generators and modulators is something that like our long-term goal is to make them unlimited, like the snap-ins. But there are a bunch
Bradley
of like,
Cooper.
yeah, exactly. So, but you know how that ends. So. But there are some structural changes we need to do to get there. One of them is something I've been working on for other reasons lately for a long time. Kind of big rework of some stuff, which is a prerequisite for this. But yeah, long stretch goal is to have unlimited generators and modulators as well, I'd say.
So the limits right now are sort of artificial, but they have to do with pre-allocating memory, right?
Yeah,
And if we do more, it scales extremely fast in a bad way that will
Yeah.
eat up all your memory. So that's why the limits are there in the first place. But you know, like Anders said, reworking it could make it not scale in that terrible way, and instead be a much more feasible.
Lots of love in the comments for Granular.
Yeah, thanks.
Granular
you.
was a killer update, says Data Broth, and Granular was epic, and so on. Lots of lovely things. I wonder if we could take a moment to do a sort of retrospective of a past feature request and talk about how something in real life went from something we wanted to do to something that we worked on and released.
yeah.
Sure.
I think it's unfortunate that the other pair isn't here because he's kind of the one mostly responsible for Granular. So shout out to pair for Granular. But yeah.
Where did the idea first come up? Was it always something we wanted to do? Was it something a user requested? Was it?
This was definitely user requested. I would say that the main reason we actually did it when we did it was probably the top feature request.
Yeah, probably.
So that was definitely by,
And we could just see that by
requested
volume
by
of
it.
messages in the
Yeah.
Discord server and
Right.
volume of chats in
Yeah.
live streams and so
Absolutely.
on. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we heard that people wanted it.
yeah, absolutely.
And-
That's true.
Where did it go from there?
Well, it went to a design process where I and Per were like scoping up the competition a little bit and trying to see what would be interesting features. We asked around in our beta testers what they would expect from a granular generator, and then we did a couple of designs. And what usually happens, and what happened this time as well, was we had something with 1,000 controls on it, and then we gradually started scaling it back to the essentials, and we have this design philosophy that it's a quote from an old book, The Little Prince. It says, "Perfection isn't when there's nothing more to add; it's when there's nothing left to take away." And that very much applied to the granular design process. And then as Per implemented it, and I, was working with him designing it, things keep coming up, you realize, oh, we absolutely need a toggle for this, or we have to have this kind of control, and how do we manage to make it look easy while it is pretty complicated. We kept chugging along until it was we felt very, very nervous to release it, but then we did, and it worked out fine.
Yeah, and as I say, lots of people in the chat saying that it was a well thought through, well developed thing that they didn't mind waiting for in the end. So we appreciate that, everyone. Couple of interesting comments, a kind of pair of comments here then. Owen Bullis, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, says a way to push Phaseplant back in time for offsetting things like Convolver adding delay, essentially reporting delay compensation but not adding a delay. And Nasco has replied saying Convolver latency comp would be nuts. Yeah, that would allow for so many linear phase processes.
Yeah.
I don't really understand that, so maybe these guys can tell me what that's all about.
So yeah, what it's all about, or at least the first message, is that a plugin reports how much latency it adds to the sound, because a lot of effects or some digital processes adds latency, some filtering, some various things. You need some input to do the operation before you can get some output, so you get a certain amount of latency. You say to the DAW, like, okay, we have 10 samples of latency, and the DAW corrects so that everything lines up properly. So what you can do is that you can say to the DAW, okay, we got 100 milliseconds of latency, but you don't actually add any latency. That will mean that the DAW delays everything else, and your sound will kind of come a little bit before
Sneaky.
it's supposed to. And if you do that, you can use that for like various kinds of compensation and alignment, but you can also do a little bit of weird effects, like you can add, there's a trick to make like snares and claps and stuff a little bit fatter. I've heard it called fat clap, the effect, but you basically add a transient just before the clap, and that's a little bit messy to set up with negative delays and stuff in the DAW, and an effect like this, having a like inverse time latency thing like this could make it possible to do effects like that in Snap Heap or and so on. So there's a bunch of weird things you could do with that. And like Nasco mentioned, you can also, in Convolver, it's kind of common to have, for some types of impulse responses, there's a bit of latency in the IR, in the impulse response. So the body of the sounds comes a little bit later, and there is currently no way of setting that, how much latency the impulse response adds. So that's kind of a separate feature that it would be nice to be able to say, okay, this impulse response adds 10 samples or whatever of latency, because then you can have it compensated. And if you combine these two ideas, what's happening here is that if you had that latency compensation in Convolver, you could create this other effect, the inverse delay, Delayrian, and whatever. You could like create that by having an impulse response with no latency, but have it report latency. So I hope that made any sense to anyone. But I think it's a valid request to have latency compensation in Convolver. Adding that would make it possible to use the Convolver as a like reverse delay thing, but I would possibly want that as a separate effect as well, because I kind of don't like when you have to like abuse a plugin to do a thing. It's cool that you can do it, but it's obviously more easier for users to find it if it's actually
named something you would expect.
Name
I want to
useful.
do manual latency compensation, then I'm going to look for the latency snap and not for the Convolver with the, button on it.
There's so many great messages coming in. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get to all of them right now, but we are going to comb through them afterwards, I reckon, and learn a little bit from you folks. And please keep chatting to each other and answering each other's questions and sharing each other's enthusiasm and ideas. It's really cool to see so many of you having a fun time and giving us thoughts. There are a lot of comments here about multi-sampling, and I know that's another thing you've got on your collection here, Per. Do you want to just speak to that for a moment?
Sure. Multi-sampler is, to those who don't know about it, is a sample instrument where you can trigger one or more samples with and having them be affected by more parameters. So classically, you would have a sample library where you would have recorded a piano with different velocity, like how hard you strike the key, and then you recreate that with a multi-sampler on your computer, setting up the velocity or playing your controller with different hitting the keys differently hard, and that would depend that would control which sample was being played for each note. This is currently not possible in Faceplant. We have a sampler, but it's sort of just a one-shot thing. So a multi-sampler would lead to be able to create more realistically sounding instruments that would sound more like a physical instrument being played. And it's something that it's not a very common feature request, I don't think, in the Discord. It comes up now and then, but it's a very common feature request with our other business partners. Like other companies would be very keen on licensing stuff like that. It's not an easy thing to build, depending on your usage. You might need to use a lot of RAM, again, having all of those big samples loaded into your memory at all times.
The dedicated WAM.
Dedicated WAM, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So to solve that, other companies have built multi-samplers before, and one of the technical difficulties with it is like streaming samples directly from your hard drive, and oftentimes you'll even have these sample libraries maybe on an external disk drive or something with bad read times. So it's a tricky problem just reading all that data if you have something huge set up like a grand piano with 8 samples on every key, and every sample is in very high definition or something. That being said, there are easier things we can do here as well. We could make a sort of a smaller multi-sampler where you could maybe load 6 to 10 samples and have that can oftentimes be enough for other purposes where you have these maybe you just want a slightly random note every time you press the key, but things like that could be much more feasible, I think.
Sort of a halfway there.
Yeah.
There's often, degrees to which you can commit to a feature, aren't there? And going to the absolute end of the earth is very tempting. I'm sure it's got to be tough to figure out where to stop with some of these things. Just a quick thought from Abominable Sound, because it's a question I want to ask you. Change the pitch random range from 2 semitones to 12 on the granular, please. I want to know, how difficult is it to just change the range of a parameter in a product that already exists? Is that something you just go in and tweak the code and it's done, or is it something that ruins everything?
Yes and no. It kind of is just to change the range, just change the number. But when you do that, if it's a modulatable parameter, which pretty much every parameter is, that would mean that the modulation range would change. So then you have to kind of migrate old presets to scale down the modulation, and that mostly results in the correct thing. But if you have a modulation that like hits the edge of the range, so you have a modulation that clamps at +2 semitones, for example, if you then expand the range of it, then it will stop clamping at 2 and go further, and that might result in a different sound. So previously we have been very, very, very picky about not changing things that affect the sounds of existing things. We have been slightly less picky about that lately because there were some bugs we needed to fix that kind of were impossible to fix without changing things a little bit. And with the new, since a few years back actually, we have this installer where you can actually pick the version you're using, so it's kind of easy to just, if you don't want the new behavior, you can just stay at the old one. Fairly easy. So yeah, we try to, we obviously don't want things to change dramatically, but we have been a little bit more lenient on behavioral changes.
Yeah. We have one upcoming thing about envelopes, I think.
Yeah,
which is gonna. Yeah. It's not really about ranges or anything, but it's a problem, a bug with how envelopes behave that it's gonna possibly slightly affect some existing presets. But again, you can always downgrade if it messes with your sounds.
A really daft question, says Syncotron, from someone who has yet to really dive into Faceplant. Is there a wave folder?
Wave folder, as in something that...
I think kind of like a shaper.
Yeah,
right?
it
like
is kind of a wave shaper that when it go above a certain threshold, it folds back down again. I think that's what you mean. The fold back mode of the distortion is doing that a little bit, but not like the extreme kind that most wave folders that are actually called wave folders do, I would say. They are probably more harsh and do a different kind of sound. So no real dedicated wave folder right now.
But we said previously that we are working on a wave shaper that we will probably be able to do something.
You could probably do wave folding with that.
More powers coming soon, maybe. Yeah,
possibly.
Cool. Not a daft question at all. And I see there's some discussion about it in the chat too, so that's great. A few more really interesting things coming out. Granular as an effect is a really popular thought in the comments here. We've thought about that. We've talked about it a little bit. Anything more to add on that except just, we'll look at it as soon as we can.
It's the same thing.
It's one of these things where the audio input's important, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think,
that one is less, it's still interesting in Faceplant, but it's less so than a vocoder, I feel. It could go very well in Snap Heap and Multipass, or just on its own.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be perfectly adjusted to the Faceplant environment.
It requires some redesign. You can't really take the granular generator and just make it one-to-one as a effect. You have to do things a bit differently in both the functionality and DSP. So it needs some extra design. But as we said at the start of things here, that most our answers to feature requests are, we've thought about that, and
it
maybe
would be cool.
Yes, it would be cool. Maybe yes, but I agree. It would be nice.
There's an idea here from Amari Ingram, a mix knob on the frequency shifter, which I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, it illuminates an issue that we've discussed a little bit already, which is that there's a way to do that if you put it in Snap Heap and use the mix knob on the lane, but that's maybe one or two more clicks than it would be if we just put a mix knob directly on the snap-in. So why don't we just put mix knobs on every snap-in and other things on every snap-in to make it easier for people? Come on, everybody, come on, why don't we do it?
In some cases, it's kind of that it makes the layout of the plugin awkward.
Sure.
It's a little bit embarrassing to have that as the only reason, but like if you know what the frequency shifter looks like, it's just one box with a frequency. Putting like one mix button below that would probably look a little bit odd. But apart from that,
there's a sort of philosophy underpinning this, isn't there?
Yeah, I used to have a great answer for this,
right.
And it was that anything that anything that couldn't be mixed without using parallel processing would not have a mix knob. But then I found out just like a month ago, or I realized that that wasn't really true. We had mix knobs on stuff, and they were like we were not consequent with that. But that was sort of the idea at least from the beginning. So for example, give me an example of something you can't mix without parallel processing.
Frequency shifter.
Frequency shifter, sure.
Depends on what you mean by mixing. That's the thing, that you could like do a naive mix, or you can do a mix where you have phase compensation. And sometimes you want the naive mix because the phase cancellation gives an effect that you want, and sometimes you don't want it because you don't want the phase cancellation. You just want to blend the effect. So that's also a kind of a design thing. Which one should we do? And previously, like you said, it has been like, okay, if the naive mix doesn't mix or isn't the same thing as doing some kind of phase compensation mix, then we add a mix knob, because you can't really do it with a just regular blend. But at some point we probably added a mix knob somewhere where we shouldn't have, or and kind of broke that.
Right. Yes. But like a filter would be another good example. Like imagine a low cut filter. There's no way to mix that, because it goes to negative infinity decibels, and there's no way to go from negative infinity to finite finite value without causing a click or a pop. So you can't mix that without doing parallel processing. So processing the sound and then like mixing the full affected sound with an unaffected sound. So that's the reason why filter, for example, doesn't have a mix knob. You can set it up in Snap Heap if you like, but we don't put it on filter just to sort of highlight that issue with it.
That's quite mathy. Didn't expect us to get mathy on that. That's cool. But it's an interesting point. I just think it sort of illuminates the fact that there are some things that it absolutely makes sense to do for a particular person in a particular place at a particular project. Because I do this, I mix frequency shifter in Snap Heap because it sounds wacky and I like it. But you have to go through the process of putting it in Snap Heap first and then organize that and use the knob in the lane. And it is a bit tedious if you're doing that one thing, but the fact that it isn't simpler means that on average across the ecosystem, lots of other things are a little bit more uniform and a little bit more manageable. And it's a funny one because exactly, if you are doing that thing, you want that feature right there and then, and sometimes you have to go through an extra few clicks to get it. Right. And I think there's another thing coming up in the comments here about how multi-sampling is also good for drums, like building drum kits, as well as sort of more realistic piano sounds and stuff. And that is something you can sort of do with key zones and several different sample engines playing different samples and using remap modulators to. It's possible, but it's really clunky at the moment. And the same thing was kind of true for granular, in as much as, and I did a couple of videos about this in the past, that you could kind of make granular-ish type stuff happen just using the sampler and the loop zones and stuff. But just figuring out how to make it easy enough to do and like enjoyable enough to do without screwing up other things and without making a mess of the ethos across the range. It's a tough thing. It's a balance, and I think we're illuminating as well, like the biggest reason why it takes so long to do all of this is because we start talking about it, and there's always so much to discuss from so many different angles, and that's because there's so many different cool users doing different things with the stuff, and everyone has slightly different needs and different ways to come at it. And that's a fun thing. It's a cool thing to be in that position, I bet.
Let me just say something back to the point about the filter and how you set up something in Faceplant or in Snap Heap to parallel process it. Like, it's a little bit tedious, but just remember that the third time you do that, it's probably time to save a preset and call it parallel pitch shifting, and then it's really easy to recall that the fourth time you need it.
Exactly. Yeah, this is it. You set up your own workflow to a large extent, don't you? Yeah, cool. I'm either going to find a question in the comments here, or I'm going to ask you about one more of these things here, Pan,
Sure.
because we're getting near to the end of our allocated time. But there's been so many brilliant comments. I think we need to do another feature requests themed live stream soon, if you're up for it, folks.
Probably.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So don't fret, everybody, if we haven't gotten to your suggestion in the comments. Like I say, we'll comb through them, but we'll do this again sometime soon. I think we're going to take a little look at this one. I want to know what that's all about.
This one says cloud content, and this is something we mentioned many times by now. We are working on making sure that the content in all of the various content browsers in our plugins, like all the preset browsers and all the sample browsers and LFO curves and wavetables and stuff, are gonna have like an online part to it. So within the plugin, you're gonna be able to find content that other users made and shared, which is hopefully gonna, make the available stuff just so much more attractive, I hope. We're also putting like voting into there, so you can vote stuff that is good up to the top, and stuff that is bad can like sort of go away a little bit, so you can get good results. If you want to search for ukulele, you can find 150 presets, and at least one of them is hopefully going to be a good one near the top. So that's a really big project, and that's one from this list that we are actually really working on, and it just takes a long time to finish it. It has a lot of moving parts and difficult areas of design and implementation and, legal issues and stuff.
Kablam Daoud says, love these streams. Good job, everyone. They love it. They love it. Cool. We're so popular. Thank you. That's really nice. A few thoughts here about feedback. So 5 steps says send and receive snap-ins and feedback paths and so on. So feedback, send and receive from Josh Field
feedback
and
system.
so on. So Christopher also says
let's talk about that
paths.
again. So one of the things that that is lacking from sort of like just the general routing and everyday use of our effect chains is just that feedback. We've talked a lot about how to introduce feedback into the systems without making it too complicated, and there are a couple of ideas. One would be to have a feedback knob on every effect lane, so that lane would feed back into itself with like an amount. Other ideas include having a separate host that just does feedback, like a pop-out host like Heap or Multipass. And then yet another idea that is kind of complicated is a pair of snap-ins that would be called send and receive. And send would be very simple. It would have just one setting. It would basically be a name. You can name it. And then the receive part would have a drop-down where you could find all the named instances you have and select which one you want to receive from, and then maybe like maybe a built-in limiter or something, because feedback can destroy your speakers or ears really easily.
And that's why I want it.
Yeah. And all of these ideas have pros and cons, but it's something we're absolutely dying to have as well. It would make a lot of really cool stuff possible. And I also think that despite a lot of people are asking us for cooler filters or better filters without being very specific about it, and I think in reality that feedback in conjunction with the filters that are there already could probably solve a lot of that, or at least to some extent. I think when a lot of people ask for cool filters, they sort of want a filter with some feedback, and I think maybe this could help, hopefully.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to call it roughly there, folks, because we've got homes to go to, apparently. But it's been really, really nice discussing this. And like I say, I think we'll set up another one of these maybe after the summer. And this might actually be the last live stream for a little while, because we're all going away on our long Swedish summer break soon, but I've threatened to pop into the office myself and do a little stealth stream sometime during July. We'll see. But thank you very much, Per. Thank you, Anders.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Is there
And
any
thank you.
final comments to share with anyone? Anything you need them to know with burning urgency?
Yeah, absolutely. Jump on to the Discord if you're not already
Yep.
there, and let us know what you want in the future of Kilohearts.
Excellent. And I'll just say thanks again for watching. Thanks so much for all the comments. We're going to go through them really carefully and figure out which ones of them are the awesomest, and we're going to rank them, and then we're going to do a competition, and we're going to make sure that you're all fighting each other for supremacy in the feature request. No, we're not going to do any of that, but we are going to check through the comments again afterwards and use that as fodder for our next stream all about this stuff, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. So thanks very much for your time. Thanks for clicking like. Thanks for being here, and catch you all again sometime soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye.